Hi everyone and welcome. My name is Joe Brady and I'm your host today as we discuss choosing a paper surface for your inkjet prints. Now this presentation is a little bit different than a lot of the tutorials I've done in the past, as it is a discussion designed to serve two purposes. The first is as an introduction to this new series that I mentioned about printing for those of you interested in getting beautiful, accurate, and consistent color in your fine art inkjet prints. Towards that end, today's talk is about the qualities and properties to consider when you're choosing a paper. Now, while I'll be showing you some examples of the same images printed on different papers, I'm not sure if those qualities are going to be readily apparent on the video, but we'll do our best to try to show you. To fully appreciate the unique characteristics of some of the surfaces, you're going to have to try some of the papers out for yourself. What I hope to provide you is some guidance and starting points so that you'll be able to narrow your search for your ideal paper. One thing I know that's going to happen is you're not going to find the ideal paper. There really is no one perfect paper. It's going to come down to the type of mood and feeling you wish to project, along with the method of display. Those things are going to have a big impact on your paper surface, and we'll explore that in a little more detail. Now, while I'll be using inkjet papers from ILFORD's, let me show you this, from ILFORD's Galerie Prestige paper line, this isn't meant to be a commercial. The goal is to talk about inkjet papers in a generic sense so that you can make an informed decision on which paper surfaces you'd like to try for your own work. Now, the second purpose of today's talk is to get you thinking about not just the paper, but some of the technical and artistic considerations that are going to go into making these choices. Now, don't let me scare you away with that statement. My plan is to break down all the parts into focused sections so that you can follow along. And this will happen in future sessions. Some of these sessions will be focused on software and hardware, including some detailed work in Adobe Photoshop and Adobe Lightroom, coupled with some monitor and printer calibration equipment from X-Rite. These will be step-by-step tutorials showing you how to get the technical aspects of inkjet printing under control. So let's take a look at some of the upcoming topics. This is what's going to include. The first one will be making a gallery quality fine art print. This session is going to explore the aspects and qualities that make for this type of print. Exacting color, smooth tonal transitions, and well-balanced contrast range are all going to come together to make a print worthy of hanging in most any venue or location. In this presentation, we'll explore the process, tools, and software techniques from edit to output that will allow you to produce a print you'll be proud of. In that, also, I'll get into bit depth, resolution, and the effect of tonal edits on your images. Next will be color workflow for inkjet printing. Now, working in a controlled and calibrated environment is going to be important to achieving consistent and accurate results when you're creating quality inkjet prints. Color spaces, monitor profiling, color settings, and printer profiles all work together, and they'll eliminate headaches and allow you to produce the beautiful print you want every time. I'll also talk about using factory and custom paper profiles and show you how to soft-proof in Photoshop, which will allow you to make creative decisions based on the paper surface and how the print will be presented. Next will be fine art black and white printing. It's actually a paper that's going to be arriving in January. I can't wait to get my hands on it. And if you go on the ILFORD site, you'll see it there. It's actually a paper specifically designed for black and white printing. Many images of both landscapes and portraits seem to have more impact and purity when presented in black and white. Case in point, I'll talk about this a little more. This image is printed on fine art weave paper, and on gloss, it just didn't have the same impact. On this beautiful fine art paper, it just created an absolutely beautiful image. Now again, the mood that you want to project is going to have an effect on that. Again, for example, here's another print. This is printed on Gold Fibre Silk. So this is a lot more impact, a lot more depth to the blacks. It's got a greater Dmax, which is that depth of that black. So it really comes down to what is it that you want to show. Now, monitoring profiling and custom printer profiles will also help you to ensure the most accurate tonal distributions, and the paper and method of presentation is also going to affect how these black and white prints are received by the viewer. Just as we explore, join us also as I'm going to explore black and white conversions from edit to print, and we can create stunning prints that will be ready for display. Next, we'll be preparing inkjet prints for public viewing. This will be the final presentation of this series, and the final presentation of your print is going to have a big impact on how it's received. I'll talk about mounting and framing options. We'll visit some folks that do framing for a living. Knowing how your image is going to be presented is also going to affect your choice of surface and preparation. When a print will be hung, mounting, matting, surface covers are all important consideration. Is the print going to be laminated? Will it be behind glass? What light source will be illuminating the print? Answering these questions will help guide you to the best choice for your image. Now, in this webinar, I'll also explore some of the possibilities to present your images in the best way possible. So, let's get started. We're going to begin our exploration of the different papers. Now, as I mentioned, the paper you choose for your fine art photography is going to have a dramatic effect on the appearance and impact of your image. When you carefully select your paper, you will soon find that the art of printmaking becomes an important part of your creative process. Now, I have a confession to make here. I actually had started losing interest in doing my own printing, and I was content to send most of my work out to a lab. Having some of the new papers from Ilford made available to me has completely changed my mind. Once I saw the first few images come out of my printer, I was hooked. Now, I primarily print on two different printers, an Epson 2880, which is a 13-inch wide printer, and a Canon IPF 6350, which is a 24-inch wide roll-fed printer. Seeing my first portrait image on the new Ilford Fine Art Weave coming out of my printer just brought a huge smile to my face, and I am completely hooked. If you've never printed on a fine art inkjet paper, you've been missing out. There's nothing wrong with the beautiful luster surfaces that are out there, but when you explore, you're going to find out there's some papers that really will make your image perfect. So let's start breaking down the basics of these papers and see what we can learn. I'm going to cover some of the basics, not all of which might be obvious at first glance. This is going to include the paper's weight, brightness, and surface texture, because these are all going to have an effect on the appearance of color and tone on finished prints. In addition, the method you choose to mount and display these images can add to their appeal and longevity. Before we start choosing a paper surface, let's take a look at some of the prime elements that contribute to paper quality and durability: weight, brightness, and the archival properties. Let's start with paper weight. Now, the weight of a paper might not seem that important, but it can have a big effect on the presentation, durability, and longevity of your print. As I mentioned, I'm going to be using the ILFORD GALERIE Prestige papers for my prints. All these papers, with one exception that I'll talk about, have weights above 300 grams per square meter. This number tells how dense the paper is, with higher weights typically meaning a higher quality paper. Now, if you've ever printed on paper that you've used from a copier on your inkjet printer, you might have seen paper in pounds. The pounds number was based on a weight of 500 sheets of paper of a standard sheet size, which unfortunately wasn't really a standard. Some papers used a 17 by 22 inch as a standard, others used 25 by 38 inches. Not very helpful. Using grams per square meter is a much more useful number, and it's now become a standard that most all fine art inkjet papers now use to identify weight. So you can see from manufacturer to manufacturer, they're all using this GSM, or grams per square meter number. So why do you care about a higher weight? Higher paper weights have distinct advantages during handling, printing, and mounting. There's nothing more frustrating than printing out a beautiful large print only to have it get one of those little annoying half-moon dings from the paper creasing. Heavier papers are much less prone to letting this happen. They're also more resistant to just general buckling and curling, especially if you have a print that's got heavier ink coverage. It's going to allow the print to lie flat. When framing a print, this heavier paper allows the use of less destructive mounting tools. So you could use something as simple as photo corners because the paper is going to stay flat. This eliminates the potential damage that can be caused by tapes and adhesives. Now, keep in mind that paper acts like a sponge all the time to moisture and humidity. You might notice that when a print comes out of the printer that it curves away on the image side. Heavier paper is more resistant to curling. Papers are always going to curl as they get wet. And if you think about it, the reason that the paper is curving away from you is that surface has gotten ink. This one side has gotten ink, has got a liquid component to it. That causes the fibers in the paper to swell, and it gets a little bit wider, while the back is dry, so it's pushing against that. As the paper dries, it will go back nice and flat. And having a heavier paper makes that curl much less of a problem. Next is paper brightness. Now, the brightness or whiteness of a paper is often a creative decision that will be very subjective. Now, if having a very neutral cast to both color and black and white prints is important, a whiter paper may help. However, this statement does require a word of warning. Many papers achieve a brighter look by adding something called optical brightening agents, or OBAs, to their papers. Now, if you're into specifications, you might see a brightness specification listed for a paper based on its reflectance. Now, a clear sign that OBAs were used is when this number is 100 or more, meaning 100% of the light's being reflected back. Optical brighteners fluoresce, they actually glow when they're exposed to UV light, and this makes them appear brighter. There's a problem here, though. The problem is that optical brighteners will burn out over time after exposure to light with a UV component to it. And the result is that you're going to be left with the original color of the base paper, which may turn out to be much yellower than you were expecting. Papers with optical brighteners are best avoided, maybe unless the print is only expected to be used for a short period of time. That is another one of the benefits of the ILFORD Gallerie Prestige papers, is that none of these papers have optical brightening agents, so you won't see your prints yellowing over time. Now, while it may be true that images appear to have greater brightness, saturation, and contrast on these high brightness papers, some light colors, like light yellows and light blues, for example, can actually end up seeming weaker because the paper is so bright that the ink covering over these pieces of the paper is very light and actually can weaken some of the colors. Also keep in mind, the human eye has trouble measuring brightness and can confuse it with whiteness. Because of this, a paper's tonal shading can make a technically brighter paper appear duller. This ultimately means that it becomes a subjective decision, which will ultimately be decided depending on your creative feelings about how the image should be presented to the viewer. You may find that certain types of images and subjects work better with a paper that has somewhat of a creamier tone. And this is a good example of that. I love this fine art paper. It does have it's pretty white paper, but it has a slight creamy tone to it. But with this soft, gentle image, it creates almost a pastel, glowing, painterly look that really works for this image. And this image on a glossy or a luster finish just wouldn't have the same feeling. Now, the last technical aspect of the papers is archival qualities, and you've probably heard numbers bandied about. The problem is that there's really no international standard, and many of the elements that will influence the life of the print are going to change those numbers. Image permanence is generally understood to mean at what point does fading become noticeable. But how much fading is noticeable? I've heard numbers everywhere from, well, 30% fading is the number, while others suggest that most people can see fading at 8% or less. Now, without going into too much detail, here are some of the elements that will affect the life of the print. Actually, before we go into this, I'm going to take a couple of questions. Let me bring up my iPad here and see what questions that you guys have. Okay. Somebody asked about metallic papers, and I'll talk about that a little bit later because metallic papers create their own set of issues, mostly with how they're going to be presented. They can be really cool, but they don't do well behind glass unless you use a very expensive glass called museum glass, and I will get to that a little bit later. As far as the different sizes of paper, now if you go onto the ILFORD site, you might notice that there's a whole bunch of papers there, some which are saying January. There's a whole new line of papers showing up in January, and they're already on the ILFORD site, including some cotton rag papers and that black and white paper that I mentioned. Now, some of the papers that I'm using, and again, my new favorite paper, the Fine Art Weave, is only available in rolls now, but again, that's going to change come January. So if you're curious about sizes that are available for each of the different papers, take a look at ilford.com. Someone also mentioned about sample packs, And yes, sample packs will be available. When we're done with our follow-up, we'll include all the details about where you can find that kind of stuff. Let's see, someone asked about, here's another good question. Someone else said they were also fed up with printing and went to lab printing because it is cheap. Is it more about control doing your own printing? I have to say, yeah, it is. The thing about printing myself is that I have a greater control over the type of paper I'm going to use for the type of print. Most labs will offer you a gloss or a luster or a matte, sometimes a canvas, but they don't give you the ultimate control if you find a very specific paper you like. And that's what's going to happen when you try some sample papers. You're going to find there's a certain paper that you fall in love with because how it reacts to your images. Also, and again, we'll get into this in further sessions, where I talk about custom printer profiles and actually dialing in the color for your specific printer-computer combination with that paper, because that's going to really allow it to be fine-tuned. The combination of doing that with soft proofing is going to allow you to determine any adjustments that need to be made to the file so that that print comes out on that paper looking just like you saw it on the screen. Let's see. Somebody asked about canvas. Yes, there is a canvas, and I'm going to show you that in just a minute. Does Ilford have a metallic surface? Not to my knowledge yet, although one of the papers that I will show you is very close to metallic. It's actually called high gloss. It doesn't have that kind of shimmery sheen that looks sometimes a little overblown on some of the metallic papers, but it's very close to it. And again, we'll get you information on getting sample papers when we're doing that. Let's see, anything else? I think that's going to be it for now. One last question, good. So somebody asked, what are the best inks to use with paper for archival quality? Generally at this point, all of the manufacturers' inks are designed for their printers and they're going to work. The inks that I'm using, and we're going to talk about archivability with specific inks in just a second, all the ink combinations from the manufacturers, be it Epson, HP, Canon, all have very long lives. It all depends on how the print is then protected and presented. So actually, you kind of led me in as a segue into the next section. So let's talk about the elements that will affect print life. So the first thing is atmospheric conditions. Well, you think, well, what does that mean? Well, what is the light doing? How much UV light is hitting the image? Is there direct sunlight involved? What is the intensity of it, and how many hours a day is it actually hitting the image? Humidity and temperature will also affect the print life. If you've got humidity above 65%, or it's very warm, 75 degrees or higher, the image is going to fade faster. Air pollutants, if you've got a smoker around, ozone is a problem if you're in a city environment. Also, how is the print protected and how is it handled? If somebody was touching the print with their bare hands and left a lot of oils on the paper, that's going to cause a problem as well. Is the paper coated? If it's uncoated and unprotected, then the paper isn't going to last much less than if it is protected. Has it been laminated? Now there's two different types of laminating. There's cold laminating and hot laminating. Most inkjet manufacturers and paper manufacturers recommend against using hot lamination, which actually melts the laminate onto the surface. Spraying and coating is an option. A lot of people will spray their prints or coat. Particularly if you're dealing with the canvas prints, I will coat mine. Is it going to be behind glass? Is that glass UV glass, or is it something really high-end like museum glass? And lastly, is the print going to go in an album or a book for mounting? And that, of course, is going to have it last a long time. Now, in addition to all these possible effects, don't forget our discussion about OBAs or optical brighteners earlier. If your paper contains optical brighteners, they're going to yellow over time because those fluorescent brighteners will fade as they're hit with UV light. Now, depending on the brightness and duration of the light source, unprotected prints might best have a life from 10 to 40 maybe years. Now, if you leave them in direct sunlight, all bets are off. You might have a print fade in a day. Now, putting prints in an album can increase this number to 100 plus years, provided you use acid-free paper. But we want our prints to be fun, our prints that are going to be shown out to the world. Putting your print in a frame behind UV glass, not in direct sunlight, is going to result in a print life with these Ilford papers of 250 plus years under normal viewing conditions. Now, I'm not sure how many of you will be looking at your prints 250 years from now, but maybe your great-great-great-grandkids will get a kick out of the image. Now, again, all of the Ilford papers I mentioned I'm using have ratings of 250 plus years from the best-known archival testing facility. You may have heard of them. It's called Wilhelm Imaging Research. But you do need to understand that these numbers are highly variable, depending on how the image is mounted and where it's viewed. But if you take care of them, they'll last a good long time. Again, if you leave your prints on the dashboard of your car on a sunny August afternoon, all bets are off. The print's not going to last very long at all. So let's get to the fun stuff, choosing a paper surface for our prints. Now, while there are many variations, I'm going to explore some main paper surface types with some variations in each family. So let's take a look. Here's the list. Our first paper is pearl. Some people call it luster. It's a fairly glossy surface. It's the most popular surface that people use today, and I think probably because when you get a photographic print back from a lab, it's also the most common surface that labs use. Next is going to be smooth gloss. Just regular high glossy paper. Not high gloss, let me take that back. Just gloss paper. It's very reflective. It gives you deep saturated colors. It's great for commercial work and portfolios. Next, we're going to go in the other direction, the fine art matte papers. Now, these come in both smooth and textured surfaces. Matte surface is not reflective, and it works really well under glass and lamination. It has less contrast than gloss surfaces in general, but it's ideal for smooth pastel colors and black and white prints. Now, I had mentioned high gloss. This is Ilford's closest paper that I've tested to some of the metallic papers out there. It's extremely reflective and saturated. It is great for display prints. I haven't tried putting it behind glass, so that will be an experiment we'll do when we get into the mounting part. And then lastly, canvas. Now, canvas mimics a painter canvas with a similar weave pattern. It works really well for images not requiring the finest detail, typically portraits. It frames well. However, you don't have to frame it. It's frequently typically sprayed or coated with a varnish. Now, one nice thing about the canvas is that the texture hides imperfections in skin and helps to create a more painterly effect. However, that said, there is no hard and fast rule as to what kind of paper surface you're going to use. And the reason I say that is, this is an image that I took last year in Monument Valley, and I printed this on canvas. And one of the things I love about it is this image was varnished with a matte varnish so that it still had its depth, but it's protected and mounted to just be out without a frame. This is stretched on wood, but the image is nice and tight and the colors are nice and saturated. Even though the canvas has a bit of a texture to it, there's enough detail. And also, you need to compare detail to viewing distance. Something that photographers do, and I know you're out there. Let me bring up another image that would be more appropriate. Let's see. I'll bring up this black and white here. You photographers are the only ones that do this. This is how you look at prints. You look at them right up close, but there is a thing called viewing distance, and it's based on the size of the print. Most people are going to view a print like this at arm's length. As the print gets larger, the distance to the viewer is going to get a little greater. So for example, these portraits over here, typically, again, something like this, maybe you're going to view at arm's length. Photographers, again, they're the ones that look at it like this with a loupe and say, oh, what camera was this shot with? Understand that the viewing public doesn't do that. So what types of images work best on which paper surface? So let's take a closer look at some of these examples. I mentioned landscape. Now I've got this Monument Valley landscape that worked really well on canvas. And my thought process was I wanted to have this free hanging without a frame to distract from the image. Canvas worked perfectly on that. Now here's an image. I just took this recently. This was taken in October. This is Grand Tetons. Now, this was printed on the gloss surface. And you can see as I change the angle of the print, our studio lights start to cast quite a bit of glare on it. So if you're going to print on this, understand that you have to be careful of your lighting conditions. Now, the gloss paper did make this image have a lot of pop. The colors are very vibrant. They're very deep. But again, this is just mounted right now on gator board, which I'll talk about later. I will probably frame this. I'm not sure if I'm going to put it behind glass or if I'm going to spray it. Haven't decided yet. So the other thing about glossy papers is laminates don't work great on glossy papers, especially if you're dealing with those metallic papers, because there's no tooth in the paper for that laminate to grab into. So just beware that if you need to have something laminated because you can't put it behind glass, glossy paper is probably not going to be the choice for that. Now just to show you one of the real high gloss, and again, I'm not sure how well this translates through the video, but this is the high gloss paper, and this is very close to being a metallic print. And again, this is actually the same location as the other one, and you can see as I adjust the angle of the paper, we do get a lot of glare on it. But that said, the high gloss paper, which has this metallic look to it, has such incredibly vibrant colors that if that's the mood you're after, that might work best. Again, this image I will probably put behind glass. I haven't had it framed yet, but we'll do that for the next session or the upcoming session. Now, portraits have a completely different mood to them. We've seen this black and white print, but let's come on over here. Here's the same print on two different papers. Now, when I originally printed this, I was thinking Gold Fibre Silk, which is a beautiful luster paper. Then I printed it on gloss to see, and yes, I got nice deep blacks in it. However, actually I'm going to move this out of the way, because I then took this same print and printed it on the fine art weave. And this print just came out gorgeous. It's got a little bit more of a pastel feel to it. It actually looks like it's almost a watercolor paper or a pastel paper. And it added a little bit of softness and gentleness to the color transitions that really helped the image. And it created a much more dreamy, romantic feel for this portrait. And you can see, like Rick, if you can kind of zoom in here. Again, I'm not sure how well it'll show up on the video. But again, we have the same image with the two different papers. And you can see there's an intensity in the colors, but they're different. Again, you're not seeing the full tonal range through the video. They both have very good tonal ranges from light to dark, but the transitions are very different. And some of the deep shadows are a little lighter on the matte paper. That said, even portraits can work well on a highly glossy surface if they're more edgy kind of portrait. For example, here is one done on a smooth gloss. And again, it's a very twilighty looking kind of image, very high contrast obviously. And for this, the blacks really have a lot of pop. If I angle it, you can kind of see that the surface is kind of light up there. So again, you'd have to be careful with your lighting source for an image like this. But in this type of image where it's much more graphical, a very glossy surface really worked well. And lastly for portraits, this is another one. I had originally printed this on canvas and I decided I wanted to see what it looked like on the fine art weave. And again, created a beautiful portrait, very high key image, even though she's got dark hair. And you can see as I angle the print, yeah, you're seeing a little brightness difference because of the studio lights, but there's no glare. And you can change the angle of this from pretty much any viewing distance and it's going to look great. If this goes behind glass, there's not going to be any problems with reflectance from the glass. Now, we've also talked about presentation options. You've seen some of the different ones here. Again, as I mentioned, this is what's called gator foam. If you're familiar with foam board, it's very similar to it. The difference really is that it has a hard surface on either side. It's almost like a formica. So it stays very rigid. It does not bend at all. Great if you're going to have a print that's going to be displayed and maybe not framed. And this comes in white and black cores. So if you want that kind of black edge on your image, it's very cool stuff. I mentioned something else we use. This is called Sintra. And again, this is done on the smooth gloss. It's a high gloss. It's kind of a little surreal image. I composited from two images. The moon actually wasn't that big. It looks like another planet now. But this is printed on Sintra. And again, Sintra is kind of a hard plastic that is also flexible. You can actually bend it quite a bit. Haven't found a reason to do that yet. Could make for an interesting display though if I wanted to actually put it on a curved surface. But the nice thing again is that It's a fairly rigid material once it's put in a frame. So Sintra is a good choice from that. And one of the nice things about Sintra is it's available pre-glued, pre-adhesive, and you actually peel off a sheet and you can carefully roll onto this and then cut it. And of course, as I mentioned, when you're going out to canvas, my favorite thing to do with a canvas print is to actually stretch it using wood canvas stretchers. And we'll go through the process of this in the future session where we go into the details of creating a print, and we'll deal that when we deal with framing. Let me just check real quick to see if we have any other questions. Okay, so again, the ink. A couple of you are asking about what ink should be used. Again, with my printers, I'm using the manufacturer's ink. I'm using the Epson inks from my Epson and the new Canon Lucia inks in my big printer. And they will last for a good long time. Now, a couple of you are asking about comparisons from one paper to another. Again, try that in the chat room. I know there's some folks from ILFORD that are joining us. If not, we'll give you an email address when we do our follow-up so you can send us questions, and I can give you my personal take on comparing papers from different manufacturers. It's like somebody asked, where can you order Gator board? Now, that's the kind of thing I just Google, but you'll find that. Somebody asked also about gloss differential. Which gloss papers show this less? It's going to depend somewhat on your ink coverage as well. Keep that in mind. There's two gloss papers that I'm dealing with, the smooth gloss and the high gloss. Well, you can figure it out by the names that the high gloss is going to be a little bit more glossy, and that's going to be much more reflective. As far as matte papers being the least reflective, I can tell you with my own experiences, smooth matte and fine art weave. The smooth matte, just what it says, it's got no texture to it. Now, I don't think there's any way we could actually show this on video, but if you actually looked at this paper really close, I don't know, Rick, maybe you can zoom in on here. I doubt it's going to show up on the video. And that's, again, the kind of thing that you'd have to look at under a sample print. But there's actually a very fine texture, and if any of you have ever done pastels, that's the kind of effect you're going to get, is like a pastel paper. So because it has that texture in the paper, it scatters the light even more, and there's virtually no reflectance off of that. Here's a good question. What paper type should be used in a high humidity area like a bathroom? Wow. If you're going to use, and I actually do, I do have a whole bunch of seascapes that I have in my bathrooms at home. And really the key to that is they have to be framed. They got to be behind glass, or they've got to be heavily coated. And also I make sure to use a dust cover on the back of my frames. I want to make sure that the image that's behind the glass is isolated from the room humidity, and then that goes away. And to that, someone asked, am I going to do a show on mounting? And the answer is yes. When we do that, we'll do framing, mounting, surface protection, step by step, and as I mentioned, we'll actually visit a framer to do that. Somebody asked about bronzing. If you're not familiar with bronzing, none of the papers that I'm showing you today have a problem with bronzing. What bronzing is as you look at the paper kind of at an extreme angle, it kind of looks to disappear. It looks like all the tones kind of go the same. Not seeing that with really any of these papers, and particularly if you're going to actually take this print and mount it, spray coat it, laminate it, or put it behind glass, bronzing really isn't an issue. And someone else asked about metamerism. Metamerism is when a particular color in a print looks different under different light sources. We're going to talk about that actually in the next session, just in general, creating a gallery quality print. The one after that, where we talk about color workflow, I'm going to go into detail. And that gets into actually talking about custom profiles and adjusting them to the light source. And we'll talk about that in just a second, because I just want to talk real quickly about light sources. Do you need to adjust the printing profile for your light source? And that's something we're getting a little more advanced. Every different light has its own different characteristics, meaning there are different spikes and valleys in the spectrum of the light. For example, tungsten light's pretty easy. You can see as you turn down the dimmer on a tungsten light that it gets very yellow. Well, if you've got this strong yellow cast coming out of your light, what's going to happen to the print? Well, what's the opposite of yellow? It's blue. So what that means is if your print has a lot of blues in it, like this one, if I were to hang this image and it was going to go under a tungsten light, a basic tungsten light, then the blues would be greatly diminished. So what I can do is I can actually adjust the profile to the light source. And that's something that we will do in one of the detailed sessions when I go over that. During the next presentation, which is creating a gallery quality print, I'm going to delve into the how-tos. We'll talk about some color management, color editing, and color workflow in general, so that you can get print images that will do justice to your photography and your vision of how the image should be received. Another color, for example, actually I wanted to bring up another image. Another color issue is if you're dealing with fluorescent tubes, fluorescent lights. A standard fluorescent tube has a very strong green spike in it. Your eyes can't see it. Your eyes actually fix it for you. Your prints can't. So if you've got a fluorescent tube that's got this green spike in it, you have an image that's got a lot of the opposite of green, which is magenta, you're going to find a noticeable color shift. In an image like this, which has a kind of a strong orangey component, magenta is a component of that. So if this image was shown under a standard fluorescent tube, it's going to lose some of that intensity. That's the beauty of creating a custom profile that's adjusted for the light source. So if you're going to be dealing with installing prints for a client and you don't know what light source you have going in, you need to find that out. If it's going to be under tungsten lights, you need to know that because you can adjust the profile to boost the blue so that when it's under those tungsten lights it looks correct. Again, that's a little more advanced stuff. The reason I just brought this up, I just wanted to show you this last example of one of the fine art papers. When I first was printing this image, and this is from Antelope Slot Canyons, it was very graphical and I thought, well, obviously it's going to be a gloss print. And I printed this on Gold Fibre Silk, which is more of a pearlish finish. And it's a gorgeous paper. It's probably my second favorite paper. It's got that luster feel to it, a lot of density, great transitions. I decided to also print it on the fine art weave paper and was amazed at the result. It's a slightly different feel, and again, I'm not sure how well this translates on the video. It's a little more subtle, it's a little more pastel-y, it's a little more painterly. So that's going to come into the environment the image is going to be viewed at. If the rest of the environment, maybe the furnishings are a little more high-tech, a little more, a little more edgy, then this type of paper is going to work best. If it's a more gentle setting with more muted colors in the room, then going to a fine art paper might look best. So again, that all comes down to the vision of how you have your images being seen. And again, creating this gallery quality print is knowing how to use ICC profiles for your specific printer paper combination. I don't want you guys to be scared of that. Understanding the color workflow is going to go a long way towards eliminating the headaches. I'm sure many of you, if you've printed a couple of times and just not gotten good results or not gotten consistent results, I'm going to show you how to do that. I'll break down the concept step by step so you can make the color work for you. Let me check to see if we have any last questions. Let's see here. Here's a good question. Somebody asked about, can you address the costs between self-printing and using a commercial printer? Good question. Sometimes it can be true that self-printing can be more expensive, especially if you happen to run out of an ink. However, you can figure if you're sending it out to a printer, they have to make money as well. One of the beauties of the ILFORD papers is they are really high-end fine art papers that are considerably less expensive than some of the competitors. So that's another reason to take a look at those. Someone asked, how many sheets of paper do I go through to get a final print? And someone said, sometimes I go through a half a dozen sheet and want to get it down to less. I go through one because I soft-proof. Yes, I've had a lot of experience doing this, so maybe it might take you a second print to get it really nailed down. But this is the whole thing, that color workflow and learning how to soft-proof, and having a good monitor system that's calibrated will allow you to do that. I really do one print. Both of these prints, for example, were one-offs. I adjusted the image to the paper profile, send it out to my printer, and I was done. It really is that easy. Let's see. And it's, again, someone asked about the paper is best to bring out detail. Well, a glossy paper with no surface is going to be better for fine detail. However, again, you have to take in viewing distance. What is the purpose of the image? If it's a portrait, generally you don't want to show fine detail, unless it's maybe a beauty fashion image where you want to see every little eyelash. Viewing distance is going to cut down on that detail. Someone asked if it's safe to dry mount prints. For sure. And again, when we get into the framing mounting part, we will talk about that in detail. All right. Oh, someone asked again, any tricks for curl when printing roll paper? It depends on your printer. Someone said they were having a curl near the last third of the roll. Be careful when you're storing your papers that they're not in a highly humid environment, because if they do, they're going to even curl more. I do keep my papers in their bags until they're coming out for printing, load them into the printer. The room that I use, I don't have a humidifier in. In fact, I have a dehumidifier in it if I'm going to be doing printing. So cut down on the humidity of the room, and that really shouldn't be an issue. And again, somebody asked detail about the difference between hot press and cold press. That's something generally used for art papers. Not all inkjet paper manufacturers use those terms, but hot press and cold press really has to do with the depth of the texture of the paper. Hot press is a finer. Cold press is probably the roughest paper you can get. And then lastly, someone mentioned what equipment brand do I use to calibrate my monitor and get the proper color in your printer. I'm a big fan of the X-Rite stuff, and I'll be showing you how to use that. I'll show you kind of the different options from the very basic and easy up to the top of the line and what it allows you to do. Listen, that's it for me. I'm out of time. Thank you for the great questions. Again, when we send out the follow-up email, we'll give you an email address. If you have some more questions, feel free to respond back to me. I'll get back to you as soon as I can. We're going to send out this email with all the links also to all the relevant sites. We'll also include a short survey. They're just buttons you got to click on, and as an incentive to get you guys to fill it out, because it gives us the information we need to create webinars that you guys have asked for. It has the information you want. For everybody that sends in the survey, we're going to randomly pick out a couple of names from those who respond, and we're going to send you a box of ILFORD Gallerie Prestige paper, the surface of your choice. And it'll be either 8.5 by 11 or 13 by 19 in sheet size, and you can just tell us which surface you want. Just send out that survey, just takes a minute. We'll also keep you informed about our upcoming schedule and what else is happening in the near future. So again, thanks for watching. If I don't see you online again before the holidays, I wish you all the best and a Happy New Year. See you again soon. Bye-bye.